The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus departed from there and came to his native place, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogues, and many who heard him were astonished. They said, "Where did this man get all this? And what kind of wisdom has been given him? What mighty deeds were wrought by his hands? Is he not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him and said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his native place and among his own kin and his own house." So he was not able to perform any mighty deeds there apart from curing a few sick people by laying his hands on them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
He was amazed at their lack of faith. I want to go back to the Gospel reading of last week. If you remember last week in the Gospel, Jairus comes to Jesus. He's a synagogue official. And he comes to Jesus and he begs him. He said, "Come, Master. My daughter's at the point of death. Please come and heal her. Make her well." As he begins to turn in that direction, there's another story that begins to unfold itself. There's what we call a story within a story. All of a sudden, a woman touches his hem. She's healed miraculously. 12 years of hemorrhaging. She's now healed. And Jesus knows that this is just unfolded in the middle of this crowd. And he asks, "Who has touched me?" It's not that he didn't know who touched him. He is God. He knows exactly who the person is by name, their life, where they come from. He knows everything about that individual. But there's something that he's after. And there's two things that are unfolding in this scenario: touch and faith. You see, one of the great unique mysteries of our Catholic faith from the very, very beginning, 2,000 years ago, was the mystery of this contact that the human being would have with God. The old law provided no such thing. Unless God revealed himself to someone through an angel, or he himself revealed himself like to Moses and to his prophets and so on, the average Jew had no contact with God. He only felt that when he kept the law and he said his prayers, that somehow God heard it. But now Jesus was changing all of that. And we begin to see in the last year of his public life this unfolding of this very unusual aspect of Christianity, touch. Because in the first 2 years of his public life, he heals from a distance. The lepers come to him and ask to be healed, and he says, "I do will it be healed." He doesn't touch them. But as he heads towards his last year of his public ministry and he gets closer to Calvary, he changes that dimension, that element. And the apostles are horrified that he's touching lepers. He's touching dead people to heal them and to raise them from the dead. But they do not yet understand this mystery of what Christ is bringing to Christianity, what he's giving as a gift to humanity. It wasn't simply something about keeping laws and rules and regulations. It was about something new and something different. Yes, there would be guidelines, and yes, there would be certain things and virtues and things we have to practice, yes. But there's always more to the story. And one of the things he wanted to teach to his apostles is exactly what this woman did. Touch. She simply touched his hem, and she was healed. And in Christianity, for 2,000 years until the end of time, the human being that is baptized will always have the unique grace of being able to touch God. What other religion on the face of the earth can even say that? We have that privilege. God comes to us above all things in the sacraments. He comes to us in the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity, not just to touch us, but to transform the human being from a sinner, to help the human being to grow in holiness and to be image and likeness of Christ. Like St. Paul says so beautifully, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. How many of us can even say that? It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Because God has come to touch me and transform me from the inside out. In modern Christianity, for a lot of people, it's simply about salvation. But you see, Christ didn't simply come to save the human being. He came to change the human being. He came to transform the human being. And the only way that that was going to happen is if the human being had an opportunity to touch God. And he does that through the sacraments. Every time we go to Mass, whether it's on a Sunday, a Saturday evening, a daily Mass, a wedding Mass, a funeral Mass, it doesn't matter, a feast day Mass, every time we go to Mass and we receive communion, there's something that's supposed to change within us because we touch God and God touches us. And we are transformed through the process. There's something that happens inside of us. But for many today, in the busyness and the insanity of life today, no longer recognize and realize and understand this great mystery. The reason I go to church is to touch God. How many of you on your way to church this morning understood that you were coming here to allow God to touch you and you touch Him and to experience Him? It isn't just about knowledge. There are many people who know a lot about God. The devils know about God, don't they? But they're not saved, are they? It's not the knowledge that saves the human being. It's that experience we have with God, that contact that we have with Him that makes us Christians. As St. Bernard of Clairvaux over 800 years ago said so beautifully, without that contact with God, you cannot even be a Christian. You cannot even call yourself a Christian. To touch God What a gift and what a mystery. So the next time you think about going to Mass, or the next time you're on your way to church, turn the radio off, silence in the car, and take a couple of moments and think exactly about what you're going to do in the house of God. You're going there to experience Him. He wants to reveal Himself to you. He wants to give Himself to you in the depth of your being. Prepare your mind and your heart for that moment. Get rid of all the things, all the distractions and all of that, so when you come to the house of God, your mind and your heart is open for Christ. So He can touch and transform you. And hopefully out of that touch and transformation process comes eternal salvation. For many people, it's simply about salvation. And we have Catholics who come to us all the time, who want to have their baby baptized. They couldn't care less if their child is brought up in the Catholic faith. As long as my child is baptized, they bought into this idea that somehow they're saved because they're baptized. It's not it. Baptism begins a journey. It begins a journey into the mystery of God Himself. And for that, I need the sacraments. I need God. I can't do it by myself. I can't do it according to my own understanding, to my own interpretation. I can only do it according to truth and revelation, by an act of faith. And that's the second thing that Christ is trying to bring into this experience, this woman. He doesn't want this woman to go home and simply think to herself, wow, what a great guy. I don't know who he was, but he healed me. And for the rest of my life, I'll always be grateful for that moment. No, he wanted to make sure that through an act of faith, she understood who he was. So as he searches her out, knowing full well that she will come forward, he says to her, your faith has healed you. Go home. He's now implanted within her that mystery of what we call a theological virtue of faith, which is infused into the human being when he's baptized. He gives it to this woman that she may always have faith, that she may know who he is, that through that faith she may always seek him out. She may always long for him. And when we're baptized, of course, we receive the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. Of course, the number one position of these virtues is the virtue of faith, which is defined by the church in this particular way. It is a supernatural virtue by which, thanks to the movement and the help of God's grace, we believe what God reveals to be true, not because of its intrinsic truth is obvious to us, but according to the natural right of reason and the authority of God himself revealing it. And there's a problem in modern Christianity today, including Catholicism. Everybody wants to define for himself what God has revealed or didn't reveal. You can go to any big-sized bookstore that sells Bibles today, and there's 36 different Bibles you can choose from. And there's actually one that you can buy that has in it, Christ might have said this, but there's a possibility he didn't say this. So it just leaves you guessing about everything. There's no absolute truth. How does a human being build his theological virtue of faith on abstract realities? I mean, not realities, but abstract untruths. Because in order to build that virtue of faith, I have to build it on truth and something that is real. It's something that is divinely given to mankind so he can form his conscience accordingly. Now, the human being does have such a thing as a natural act of faith. Everybody has that. If I put $100 in the bank and I leave it there for a week and I go back a week later, I have the faith enough to believe that that $100 is there because I put it there. It's not the same thing. So we call a natural act of faith. The supernatural theological virtue of faith allows the human being to believe in God himself and a mystery of the God who reveals himself to us. There was a story some years ago in National Geographic of an interview that was done by one of the writers in National Geographic of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, if you know anything about Gandhi and his history, you know that Gandhi didn't give interviews. But in this particular time, he gave an interview, which was very, very unusual. He invited the reporter into his tent, and the very first thing the reporter noticed was that Mr. Gandhi had a Bible sitting on his nightstand. He couldn't believe it. He was a Hindu. What was he doing with a Bible sitting on his nightstand? So what's the next natural question he asked him? He said, Mr. Gandhi, why do you have a Bible sitting next to your bed on your nightstand? And he says to him, have you read it? He said, oh, yes, sir. I have read it. I have read it from cover to cover 3 times. And the reporter, all aglow, looking for an answer. What do you think? And he said to him exactly what I would expect him to say. Since he's an unbaptized human being, he had no theological virtue of faith. He simply said to him, I don't understand it. If somebody can live this, I'll become a Christian. There are people who think that all they need to do is to read the Word of God and somehow they can call themselves a Christian. Well, Mahatma Gandhi can call himself a Christian. He read the Bible 3 times from cover to cover. How many of us have done that besides me? So you see, he could call himself a Christian. But he wasn't. He didn't accept Christ and what was revealed by him, because he didn't have the theological virtue of faith. You see, you and I are baptized. For us, it's natural. It's more natural for us to believe in God. We often wonder why other people don't believe in the way we do. It's because some people are not baptized, or some people are not baptized correctly. Or some people have a faith that is confusing and very confused. They have a darkened intellect. They have an intellect that is ignorant of truth. And that's the difficulty and the problem. When we have this theological virtue of faith, if we allow God to reveal his truths to us, we can form our consciences accordingly. In the virtue of divine and Catholic faith, all those things are to be believed which are contained in the Word of God, either written or the traditional word proposed for belief for us by the church. How many people today want to argue against all of that? What we call in modern terminology cafeteria Catholicism. What does our gospel say today? He was amazed at their lack of faith. Not even a natural faith could help them. The virtue of faith is an infused gift from God, but the human being must accept it. He must choose of his own free will to accept what God has revealed as truth and was proposed to us. Revealed by God, therefore, it requires an assent of the intellect. My mind must accept what God gives me, what He's revealed. I must form myself accordingly, and without that ability, without that theological virtue of faith in me growing, I cannot love God. If my faith isn't growing, my love for God isn't growing. If I have no faith in God, how can I love God? I was having a conversation with somebody one day, and they said to me, "Oh, these people love God very much." And I said, "Stop for a moment, stop. Your understanding of love and my understanding of love for God is probably two different things. Because for me, it's based on a theological virtue of faith and absolute truth. And out of that grows my love for God. These people don't have that. How can they love God? They can love God on a natural level, yes. Just like I love my husband, my wife, my kids, my dog, my cat, my car, my house, whatever. On a natural level. We are called to a much higher and much greater mystery of love than that. To step outside of the boundaries of what the human being is even capable of doing on his own. Therefore, God gives us His grace. Grace transforms our nature. It allows us to grow in holiness. And St. Paul reminds us, as he says in his letter to the Ephesians, I repeat, it is owing to His favor that salvation is yours through faith. This is not your own doing. It is God's gift. You see, we often think we are the ones who are doing it. We often think we can form our faith according to our own stupidity and our own ignorance, our own darkened and broken intellect and fallen nature, instead of allowing the light and the grace of God to enlighten us and to form us and to transform us in His image and likeness so He can live in me. You see, that has always been the unique mystery of Catholicism. Christianity was never intended to be a book. Certainly we have a Bible to teach us about the acts of Christ, how He lived His life and what He taught. But that's not all there's to the story. It goes much deeper. It goes beyond all of that. It goes to the experience, not just knowledge. Like I said, the devils know God, but they certainly don't want to experience Him. I can tell you that. The Council of Trent states that faith is the beginning, the foundation and the root of our justification. Now, many people think that simply by believing in God they're justified. Well, that's absurd. Justification is an everyday process. For as long as I live, I have to make the right choices every day. Until I take my last breath, there is no instantaneous that on this particular day, in this particular year, I was justified, I believe, and that's the end of the story. It doesn't work that way. The Catholic Church has never taught that and never will. Without faith, it is impossible to please God and be numbered among His children. It is a contact that we have with God, the author of the supernatural order within the human being. One must believe in God in order for everything else to unfold. And without that faith, like I said, it is impossible to love God, because it is the root that allows me to love God. If you wonder sometimes, if you take a little time to think about it, why you have such a hard time loving God, you might want to look at your faith. Is your faith growing every day? Let me just give you a couple of pointers, and I'll leave you with this. Things that will help our faith to grow. First of all, to realize that faith is a gift from God, as St. Paul reminds us. And to ask God for the grace that he may strengthen our faith every day. St. Augustine, the great saint and great doctor of the church, asked our Lord every day, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. For all of his life, he never took it for granted that he had everything he needed, that there wasn't anything else to learn, that he'd arrived at a certain point that there was nothing else to ask from God. He had all the faith that he needed. No, he knew better. He was humble enough to understand that faith can always grow, and if faith grows, my love and my hope grows as well. We must reject energetically, with the help of divine grace, anything that would be a danger to our faith. Doubts, especially temptations against our faith. Dangerous literature to promote worldly or anti-Christian values, and we're certainly living in a time today where people are trying to erase Christianity out of our minds. The problem with that being is we ourselves do it. We look at our lives, we play with our computers, our cell phones, 8 hours, 10 hours a day. How many minutes do we take to pray? 30 seconds maybe? We're guilty of wiping God completely out of ourselves because of technology today. Technology has become an idol. Sad, but it's the reality. We're distracted. People will make every effort in life to get their degrees, whether it's a high school diploma, whether it's a college degree, and so on and so on. And they'll invest everything they have, including selling the block of the house and everything they have to, in order to send their kids to college to get a degree on the wall, but they'll do absolutely nothing to make sure that they have a possibility at salvation, to increase their faith. Intellectual pride is a primary obstacle to understanding divine revelation. We always think we know better. Go anywhere. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of human beings who will tell you they know better than the Catholic Church and they know better than divine revelation. They can unveil it for you on their own. Without the grace of God, the human being never leads a human being into ignorance and to teach against his church. So where is this stuff coming from? Intellectual pride, possibly? Maybe some other places. The devil's always trying to destroy God's church. In order to understand these truths, one has to be humble. St. Augustine said there's only 3 ways to get to heaven. Humility, humility, humility. Be humble. Accept the truth and the truths that God has revealed to us. For as the first letter of Peter reminds us, God is stern with the arrogant, but to the humble he shows kindness. And every day we must make an effort to increase our knowledge of the truths of our faith by studying the Catholic doctrine to the best of our ability. Yeah, we'll study everything else. We want to know about everything, this and that, but God, Catholic doctrine, who cares? We just don't pay a whole lot of attention. We don't make an effort to know the greater truths of our faith. And the saints also teach us when our faith grows and it takes on a supernatural element, a supernatural dimension, the gift of understanding and the gift of knowledge comes with it. And we're not talking here about a gift of knowledge and understanding about worldly things. We're talking about a gift of understanding and knowledge about spiritual things. For here faith reaches its greatest intensity. It shines forth resplendently as a prelude to the beatific vision and the light of glory to which we are all called. He was amazed at their lack of faith, huh?